So in this project, we're going to build a notes app, and we're actually going to be able to save these notes to local storage. So we'll be using the local storage API, which is built into the browser. So I have nothing here but an add note button, and if I click that, it's going to add this little note here. So I can click in here and I can type, hello world or whatever, and this here is going to toggle. This is the edit button. It'll toggle from text area to just a regular div that shows the text. All right, I can add another one. Say hello again. All right, so we have two notes here. And if I reload, they're going to stay because they're saved in local storage. If I delete this, I reload, it's going to stay the same because, again, it's being saved to the browser. It's being saved in local storage. Another thing we can do is use Markdown because we're going to be using a small library called Marked. So if I want this to be a heading, I could do a number sign. I'm not going to go through all the Markdown syntax, but you can look up that. You can look at that on your own. I do have a crash course on YouTube on Markdown. If we want to do like an unordered list, we could do like hyphen space. And if we take a look at that outside of edit mode, we have a heading and an unordered list. Okay, if I reload, it's going to stay because, again, it's being saved. So I think it's a pretty neat application if you're learning, local storage and how to work with the DOM, add and remove things, and so on. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we should be able to get the HTML and the CSS done here. Now, ultimately, all we're going to have in the HTML is an add button to add a note, and then the note will be put in via JavaScript. But for now, like with many other projects, we're going to just type out the HTML first so we can style it, and then we'll get rid of it and we'll make it dynamic so we can insert a note with the JavaScript. Now I have my project starter and I have a link to the Font Awesome CDN so that we can use icons. There's one other small library we're going to use called Marked. So I'm going to go to cdnjs.com and just search for Marked, which allows us to use Markdown. It will allow us to use Markdown in our notes. So if we want to make something bold, we can, surround it in asterisks. We can create lists and headings and stuff like that. So I'm going to just copy the script tag here, and I'm going to put it right above the script.js. Okay, so we're just going to include that CDN, and then we'll be able to use the Marked library. Now, as far as the HTML goes, like I said, we're going to have an add button. Actually, let's add a title first. We'll just call this Notes App, and then we're going to have our add button. So it'll be a button. Let's give it a class of add and an ID of add. And then it's going to use Font Awesome, so we'll do an I tag with FAS and a class of FA-plus, which will give us a little plus sign. And after that, we'll say add note. Okay, so that gives us a button. Now, like I said, we're going to be inserting notes through JavaScript, but for now, we'll go ahead and just type it out. So it'll have a class of note, each one. And then inside here, we're going to have a class of tools. And this is where the edit and delete buttons are going to go. So we're going to say button. Let's give this a class of edit. And inside here, we'll have an icon. So IFAS and then FA-edit. And it's just going to be the icon, no text. Then I'll copy that down, and this is going to be FA-alt, and the class for this button will be delete. All right, so now we have our add and delete buttons for our note. Underneath tools, we're going to have a div, and the way this will work is we'll have a div, and then we'll have a text area. We can get rid of all this stuff, and depending on the state of the note, these may or may not have a class of hidden. So I'm going to add a class here of hidden, which is just going to be basically display none, and I'm going to leave it off the text area, so it'll be active by default. But like I said, these notes are going to be put in through JavaScript, and these classes will be dynamic depending on if there's text or not. So that should do it for the HTML. Let's jump into the style sheet here, and we're going to use the Poppins font with a weight of 200 and 400, and we'll replace this with Poppins. Okay, and then display flex. We don't need flex direction column, but I am going to set flex wrap and set that to wrap so that the notes will go on to the next line when needed. And then let's see, we don't we don't really need to do the align items or the justify content or the height or the overflow, because we might have scroll bars if we have enough notes. Margin 0, we'll keep that, and then I'm going to add some padding to the top. We'll do 3 rem units for that. All right, now the add button, let's do that. So this, I'm actually going to position this fixed into the body. So let's say position fixed, and then let's put this from the top. We'll do 1 rem, which is just a multiplier of the root HTML element, which by default is 16 pixels. So we're saying top 16 pixels from the top and also from the right. Okay, so it's going to put that right there. Now we want to style this. So let's add a background color to this, and we're going to use the hexadecimal value of 9EC862. We'll go down here a little bit. Let's take away the border, border none. Let's add a border radius of say 3 pixels. And then for padding, we'll do 0.5 rem top and bottom, 1 rem left and right. And let's make the color white, which I'll actually move up here. And then let's do a cursor pointer. And that should do it. So we have our add note button up in the corner. Now we want to style the note, which has a class of note. So let's say note, and I'm going to set the background color to white. Oops. And then let's do a box shadow. And for the box shadow, the offsets will set to 0, 10 pixel, 4 pixel, and then RGBA. Black with 0.1 alpha. So it gives it a slight shadow, and then let's add some margin, so 30 pixels top and bottom, 20 pixels left and right. And then let's set a height, so a fixed height of 400 pixels and a width of 400 pixels. And of course you could change this stuff if you'd like. All right, so that's kind of the outline of the note. Now for this part here, we have the edit and delete button. Remember, that has a class of tools. So let's say note tools, and let's go ahead and style that area. So it's going to have a background color of hexadecimal 9EC862. Okay, so give it a background, and then let's display flex. So the buttons will be flex items, and then we're going to justify the content to flex end. That'll put them over to the right. And let's add some padding to the flex container, to the tools. So we'll do 0.5 rem. Okay, now we want to style the buttons as well. So let's say note, and then the tools class, and then the button, or the buttons inside. Let's give them a background color of transparent. Let's get rid of the border, so border none. Let's make the color white, and let's set the cursor to be a pointer. I'm also going to change the font size to 1 rem and add a margin left of a 0.5 rem. All right, so I think that looks pretty good for our buttons. Now for the text area, let's say note text area. So I want to get rid of any outline, so outline none, and let's make sure the font family is inherited, and let's set the font size to 1.2 rem and set the border to none. Okay, and then we'll set the height to 400 pixels, which is the same as the note, and the width we'll just set to 100% of its container, which is the note. And then padding, I'm going to add 20 pixels padding, so it's not right up against the edge. So now we can, type in this text area. One thing that I realized, though, I forgot to add the background color to the body. So let's go up here and add background color, and we'll set that to a light blue, so it's going to be 7BDAF3 for that. Okay, so that gives it some contrast. And then the last thing is just, whoops, didn't want to do that. The last thing is to add a class of hidden, and hidden is just going to be display none, which we'll be able to add to the elements that we need to later on. Okay, now if we add another note, like if I take this whole div right here and just copy it down a couple times, you'll see that it'll add more notes. And if I make this bigger, it's gonna, it'll align horizontal, but it'll wrap when we're on smaller screens. So it's pretty much, inherently responsive. So we'll just leave it as is. And now we can get rid of, let's just undo that and that. And I'm just going to leave one of these notes here for now, but ultimately we won't need it here because it's going to get inserted when we click add note. Okay, so we'll get into the JavaScript to be able to do that next. All right, so now we're going to start on the JavaScript, and ultimately this is going to come from the JavaScript. But one thing I want to do is on this div here, I want to add a class of main. And this just represents where the text will show when we're not in edit mode, because the text area will be hidden when we're not in edit mode. And then when we toggle it with this and we go to edit mode, then the text area will show. So I'm actually going to just get rid of that hidden class for now. And then let's grab everything within this div. So I'm just going to cut that and then just delete this, because we're going to create this with JavaScript, and then we'll just insert what I just copied. So I'll save that and go to my script, and let's bring in our add button. So we'll say add btn equals document dot get element by ID. We want to grab the ID of add. Then we want to add an event listener. So add button dot add event listener. Listen for a click, and when that happens, we'll have an arrow function, and then we'll call a function called add new note. And down here, let's create that function. So add new note, which is going to take in an optional text argument, which we'll set to nothing by default. And then I want to build that div with the class of note. So we'll say const note equals, and then on the document object, we'll call create element, and we want to create a div. And then I want to just add the class of note to that. So we'll say note class list dot add, and add the class of note. Then we want to take that note and set the inner HTML equal to a set of backticks, and this is where I'm going to paste in what I copied. And we'll just kind of clean this up a little bit. Yeah, so we'll just move this over. Okay, and then down here, so basically if there's text, we want to add the class of hidden on the text area. So both of these classes, we're gonna add a dynamic class. So right here, let's open up our expression syntax with money sign, curly brace inside the class quotes, and I'm going to say if text, then have no class, else then have a class of hidden, which is display none. And then on the text area, we'll do the opposite, right? So we'll say class, and we'll say if there's text, then have the class of hidden, hide the text area, else have no class. Okay, and then to put this into the DOM, we can take our document.body, which is just, the browser body, and append child, meaning we want to add something in it, and we want to add the note every time we click the button. So now I'll click it again, and it adds the notes to the DOM. And they're in text area mode by default. Now, this right here, we can add something in here, like let's put a string and just say hello world. Now if I save that and I add a note, notice how I can't click in here because of this right here. We're saying for this div, if there's text, which we did pass in, then have no class here, and down here if there's text, then hide the text area. Okay, so we passed in text, so it's not a text area, If we do it without passing anything in, it is a text area. Now we want to make these buttons function as far as, in this video we'll go as far as the DOM, so like deleting it from the DOM and toggling the hidden on these two, but we're not going to get into local storage until the next video. But let's, inside this add new note, before we add it to the DOM, let's bring in from the note the edit button, so edit btn, and we can actually take from the note, this current note, we want to query selector, and we want the class of edit, right? And then I'm going to copy this down. We want 4 of these because we also want to get the delete. So this is going to be the delete button. And then we want to get the main. So that's class of main. And then we want the text area. So I'm just going to grab it by text area. And we'll call this text uppercase A area. And then let's add an event onto delete. So we'll take the delete button and add event listener. Want to listen for a click, and when we click we'll call a function, and for now we're just going to remove it from the DOM. So we'll take that specific note and we'll just call remove, which does just that. It just takes it away from the DOM. So if I go and I add a note, I'll add another one. If I click on the trash icon, now I can delete them, okay, or remove them. Now for edit, what we want to happen is we want to be able to toggle main and text area. So I'll just grab that and change this to edit. Okay, so when we click on edit, what we're going to want to do here is take main class list and toggle the hidden class. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing for text area. So text area, make sure you use the uppercase A version. And now you can see when I first click it, we have a text area. If I click edit, now I can't. Now the main is showing, the div with the class of main. So text area, main. Type in here, can't type in here. Okay, and that's all I want it to do for now. Now if there is text passed in to the function, like hello world, I want to be able to see that here. So I'm going to go right below where we brought in all this stuff, and let's say text area and set the value to text. Now I also want to set the main area, so I'm going to say main.innerHTML. Remember, text area has a value, so you don't do text area inner HTML. Main is a div, so I'm going to set the inner HTML to the text, but I want it to be markdown. So we can use the marked library by just simply wrapping this in marked. So if we save that, and if I click add note, I already had hello world in there. So this is the text. No, this is the main version. I can't edit it. And then if I click edit, it's the same thing. Now I want to make it so that if I update this, like I change that to hi, and then I click that, that shows here as well. So what we can do is add an event listener onto the text area. So let's say text area dot add event listener, and we want to listen for any input on that text area. And when that happens, we're going to run a function with the event object, and we want to get the value. We want to get e.target.value, and I'm going to use destructuring to pull out value from e.target. So since value is on e.target, I can use curly braces here and say const value and take that from e.target. And then I'm going to take main and update the inner HTML to the marked version of that value. So let's save that, and now if I go here and I change this to hi and I click that, you'll see that also says hi, because as I type in the text area, this is going to update. Now since we're using the marked library, we should be able to add markdowns. So let's do a heading. We'll say like list. So number sign, that would be an H1, H2, H3, and etc. And then we could do like an unordered list with hyphens. I'm not going to go over like all the Markdown syntax, but it's pretty easy to learn. I have a Markdown crash course on YouTube. And if I click that, now you can see we actually have a heading and we have our list items. We should probably add some padding to that. I think, yeah, we added padding to the text area right here. So let's also add to main padding. Yeah, there we go. All right, cool. Now it still says hello world when I delete and I create a new one, because that's just coming from here and we don't actually want anything to start with, right? And we can, we can put something in here and it shows in both text area and main, but when I reload, the note goes away. So what we want to work on next, since we have, the functionality that we have so far in terms of the DOM, we want to be able to save these to local storage in the browser. We want to also fetch them from a local storage and show, each note inside of an actual note. So we'll get into that next. All right, so now we want to implement local storage so that when we add a note here, it basically gets saved in our browser. It gets saved in local storage, which is it's a native browser API. It's not like an extra library or anything that we have to add, or we don't need a CDN or anything. So basically, to set items, we would say local storage dot set item, and we could set a key like name, and we could set a value like Brad. So that's how we would set something. To get something, we would say local storage dot get item, and we would get name, and that would give us Brad. So it's pretty simple. It's just key value pairs. In fact, I can go ahead and save this and just run this, and we can check what we have in local storage in our dev tools. If we go to the application tab, and if I go down to storage, local storage, and my local host, you'll see I have this key value pair with the key is name, the value is Brad. And then to get rid of it, if you want to delete something, you can say local storage dot remove item name. And now if I save this and this reloads, it does create it, but then it removes it, and you can see there's nothing there. So the API is pretty simple to work with. Now we can only store strings in local storage, and if you want to store an object or an array, like maybe you have an array with ID 1 or whatever, you can't store it like this. It has to actually be stringified, so it has to be a string, and you can do that with a method called, oops, get rid of that, a method called JSON.stringify, and you can pass in, whatever that object is, or array or whatever, and then when you pull it out, you just have to wrap this in JSON.parse, and that would parse it as an array or object or whatever you want it to be. All right, so with that said, let's have a function here called update ls. So this is going to update our local storage, and we're going to run this whether we delete or we're adding notes. So we'll start with adding. So in our text area, when we're typing out, I'm actually going to call, after we add it to the the main inner HTML, I'm going to call update ls. Okay, and then down here, let's say const notes text, and I'm going to say document dot query selector all, and I want to get all of the text areas. Okay, so we'll say text area, and then I'm going to create an array here called notes, an empty array, and I want to take the notes text and loop through, because this gives me a node list, so basically all the text areas I have, and I'm going to loop through with a for each and say for each note we're going to go ahead and take that notes array and we're going to push onto it. So we're going to add to the end of it whatever the note dot value. Okay, and this note dot, this is the for each note we'll add the value to the array. So what I'm going to do now is just I'm going to console log the notes array. this says we're not doing anything with local storage yet, but we just want to store it as a stringified array. So I'm going to just go to my console here, and I'm going to add a note and type in here, and you'll see that everything I'm typing is getting stored inside of this array. So that this is an array with just a single item. Actually, let's make this a little more clear. So I'll say item 1. So we have an array with one string in it called item 1. If I create another note and I put in here item 2, the second item is whatever is in this second note. So this array is what I want to store in local storage, right? So what we'll do is, what I just showed you, local storage, and we want to set an item. I'm going to call it, the key of this is going to be notes, and then I want to store my notes array. However, I can't just store it as an array, right? I have to JSON.stringify and then go ahead and add that or surround that. So now let's go ahead and add something here. I'll say item, or let's say note 1. I'm going to add a new note and say note 2. Now if I look in my application tab, you'll see in my local storage it's a stringified array of, right here, note 1, and I'll just make this a little bigger so you can see. So we have note 1 and note 2 stored in local storage. Okay, now we want to load this. Like if I reload the page, it's not showing in the DOM, but it is in local storage, so I want to fetch it and display those notes. So up at the top here, let's go right here and let's say const notes, and we want to pull this from local storage. So remember, we use local storage.get item, and we want to get the notes. However, we don't want it to be a string, we want it parsed as an array, so I'm going to wrap this in JSON.parse. Okay, so now if I console log notes and we go down here to our console, we're going to see the notes that we have in local storage. And then what we'll do is get rid of that and let's check for notes. So if there's notes in local storage, then let's loop through. Let's say notes.forEach, and we're going to say for each note I want to call add new note, which adds it to the DOM, and for the text it'll be that particular note. So let's save, and there we go. So now I have two notes. One has note 1 written in it, one has note 2 written in it, and that's what we have in our local storage. Now to delete is going to be very simple. We can just simply go down here to where we remove from the DOM, because right now I can delete from the DOM, but if I reload, it's still there, right? We haven't updated local storage. So we can just simply now call update local storage inside the delete. So now if I delete, that goes away, and if I reload, that's still gone. If I look in my application tab, we only have note 1. If I click delete there, now it's empty. If I reload, nothing. All right, so that's a pretty simple way to be able to add and remove. Basically, we have a CRUD application. We can create, read, update, and delete notes. And I mean, if I add note 1 and note 2, that gets saved, right? And then if I edit note 2 and change it to note 3, and then reload, it stays at note 3, because every time I type in to these text areas, it's updating my local storage. It's calling this function here and getting all the text areas. It's looping through those and adding whatever is in each one to an array, and then it's saving that array in local storage as a string, and then we're pulling it out up here, parsing it from a string to an array, checking for it, and then adding it to the DOM with add new note. And of course, in addition to that, we can add markdown. So if I make this a heading, and we'll just say, I don't know, item Okay, so that displays the markdown, and if we look at what we have in local storage, it's going to be a string version of this. So it has like the the number sign, and then it has these things here, the hyphens, but it's going to parse as markdown. All right, so that's it. Hopefully you found this useful, and if you didn't know about local storage, you can use it for many different things. It's very helpful. Even if I close the browser and come back, it'll be there. If you want, you can use session storage as well. I might as well mention this. So if you use session storage, it works the same way. You have the same methods and stuff, but if you close the browser and come back, it'll be gone. Local storage will keep it there until it's cleared. And you can also use local storage.clear to clear everything. You could even add a clear notes button for that. That may be like something that you can add yourself. All right, so that's it. Let's go ahead and move on to the next project.